I think I'll do 224 first, for Senator Cloud. Okay. Let me try to get all my papers here. All right. All right, Senator, and you're. All right, thank you. Thank you, Senator Milligan. Thank you for taking the chair for me and giving me an opportunity to present Senate Bill 224 on behalf of Senator Cloud. And if we could first, I would like to introduce the amendments. I think it's going to put the bill in the right posture. We did have a set of amendments last week that we adopted, and let me just try to explain to everyone exactly kind of how this has evolved. This bill started out as a bill that was focused on banning ballot drop boxes. We introduced an amendment at our last meeting that added some language around voter ID for absentee balloting, to add a few additional pieces of information, really, again, just to be able to tie the voters that were requesting absentee ballots to the voter rolls, similar to what we talked about earlier on cleaning up our rolls, just additional data to try to tie people together. I think what is the way the amendments have been drafted and what makes the most sense to me, Mr. Chairman, is for us to reconsider the vote from the original amendments from last week so that we could basically withdraw those. And then I'd like to introduce this new set of amendments that would replace them. Okay, I think I know it's a little bit confusing, but I think you'll understand after we get through it all. So perhaps you can make the motion to withdraw the minutes, the amendments from last week, and staff can give us the exact amendment number
That'd be fine. So the motion is to
reconsider the vote.
reconsider the vote on Amendment 961 from last week, correct? Any objections? None there.
Okay, and so then we have to officially make a motion to withdraw those amendments.
Okay, so we'll make the motion to withdraw Amendment 961 from the record. Any opposed? We officially withdraw.
Okay.
So we're prepared for our new amendments.
I appreciate that. So I think we have set 1441 that I'd like to introduce.
On the amendment.
Okay, so let me just kind of talk you through what we're trying to accomplish here. Amendment 4 basically is deleting the ballot drop box information. So we're taking the ballot drop box issue out of this bill. All right, we already have a bill moving through the legislature that is increasing opportunities for delivering absentee ballots. Remember the bill where you can deliver them to early voting locations. You can, turn them into the registrar of voters office. I mean, I think those are all good provisions. We don't need to have that language about ballot drop boxes in this bill. And so that's being deleted in Amendment 4. In addition, that's right on line 17. In addition, we're doing a couple of things here similar to what we introduced last week, and that is adding the driver's license number and the last 4 digits of the Social Security number on both the flap, we call the flap that you're familiar with, on the envelope, as well as having it on the absentee ballot request form. And you have, that actually is already on the absentee ballot request form, and you have a copy of those in your folder, I believe. It has a little star next to it, so it is optional information at this point. And this would be basically taking the asterisk off of it, so it's not optional. And it's just, again, the whole point of this is trying to provide additional information by which you can match voters up. We're really just trying to make sure that we're matching people up to the very best of our ability. And this information, rather than relying solely on comparing signatures, which is problematic for some people. If you looked at my son's signatures, you would see they change every time he signs a document. And so the intent is really just to have additional information by which you're able to match people up. And so, we've been working, you'll see that on the application mail ballot. It's very near the top in the very first section. It's name and date of birth, mother's maiden name, address, phone number. There's a star, SSN, last 4 digits, and Louisiana driver's license with the footnote. This is optional information. We're just going to take that off, so it's not optional. Again, trying to make sure we're connecting all the people together. That's similar, that information would be on the flap. As you know, the flap is used prior to Election Day as the ballots are coming in right near the end before we count them on Election Day and open them. It is there done. It is on the flap where you're comparing people to the database where they've requested a ballot and you're just trying to match them up. So that's what this amendment does. Though again, the most of it here is Amendment 4, all the language there. The last thing we've done is we've changed the effective date on the very last page to January 1st of 2023, which gives the Secretary of State's office plenty of time to be able to change their system and be able to implement this. And just above that, we've taken some language out on the bottom of page 2 and top of page 3 that was there that was primarily dealing with some special provisions we put in place for COVID that don't apply anymore, and the Secretary of State asked us to take those out. So I think that's basically what the amendments do, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman, on the amendments.
I appreciate that, Madam Chairwoman. So the whole onus of this is just matching up the request and the mail-in ballot, correct? I mean, that's all we're trying to do here. We're just trying to match up. So when you put the two pieces together, on paper, you've got all the records that are similar, and you can verify and audit trail and all that.
That's exactly right. And again, we will still have signatures, but we're not going to be relying so much on signatures. We'll have some additional information to be able to use to match people up.
Okay. Senator Price for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. Madam Chairman, I'm trying to see, we had a bill that was dealing with drop boxes, and now your amendment has substantially changed the outcome of this bill. How do we go from drop boxes to mail-in ballot without doing a substitute? And it's more like this is not an amendment, but a substitute bill that's being developed here.
Yeah. Well, again, it wasn't intended to be that way. I mean, from the beginning, it was intended to include both ballot drop boxes and voter ID on the absentee ballot. But in looking at, as you know, we don't always know what other bills are going to be filed. And so, I think we see that there are other bills that are addressing kind of the delivery of absentee ballots. And so, we've eliminated that out of this bill so that we don't have competing ideas or whatever. But the voter ID on the absentee ballot, we did introduce that last week. This is not any different than that. It's just the idea of withdrawing the amendments and putting this one on was just a cleaner way to do it from a drafting standpoint.
But it seems as if the title of the bill is prohibit the use of ballot drop boxes. What is the title of this one going to be? It's not going to be prohibit the use of ballot drop boxes.
No, you're right. I mean, the title will change, and you're right. That's a fair statement. But I will say, and I'm speaking on behalf of the author, and she's not, here to be able to speak directly. But I do think it was always her intent to have both of these in the bill originally. But for reasons that were out of her control, she was not able to do that. I mean, I think by the filing deadline, she intended to have both of those things in this bill. I think the ballot drop box, she dropped that in as kind of a placeholder to be able to begin the bill, and she didn't have all the voter ID language ready to go in time to file the bill with, but always had the intention of doing so.
Mr. Vice Chairman, I guess the question becomes then, is this amendment germane to this bill?
I think the amendment was originally part of the original bill, and we're just subtracting a piece of the bill that's no longer needed, my understanding.
Can you show me in here where the ballot drop boxes and voting by mail
Well,
is in this
we
bill?
accepted the original amendment last week. And
But that amendment is no longer on this. Here.
right, we've subtracted that amendment and added this other amendment, which is my understanding. The only thing this amendment is doing is subtracting out the request or the requirement for the drop boxes.
And so that makes this a new bill.
It's subtracting out the piece of the bill that's no longer needed.
Where is this in this bill?
That, and again, I can't speak for the author, is not here, but
That's right, because it's not.
But we accepted the amendment last week. That moved this forward.
That amendment last week is no longer part of this.
I understand.
So this is a new amendment to this bill about ballot drop boxes.
We can add the ballot drop boxes back in if that makes you feel better, Senator Price. But it is germane, and we did talk to staff about that. It is in the same section of law. This is all dealing with absentee balloting. It's in the same section, and so I believe that it is germane. We did ask that question and ran those traps with staff.
And let me add, Matt, if you don't mind.
Yes, sir, that's correct. It is in the same section, and the one-liner at the top is will change after today, but it's not considered part of the law.
So will this be a bill reported by substitute or a bill just amended?
Would you?
Sorry. To clarify for Senator Price, where it says prohibits the use of ballot drop boxes, that's the bill summary. That's not the title. The title of the bill is what starts on line 2, and the title is the bill is relative to absentee by mail and early voting ballots. And the amendment is about absentee by mail and early voting ballots.
So we're referring to revised statute 1308B.
1308B is only part of the law regarding absentee voting by mail and early voting ballots, and the amendment goes into other sections about preparation and distribution of the absentee by mail and early voting ballots, and application by mail for those ballots, tabulating and counting of the by mail and early voting ballots, early voting and verification, and counting of absentee by mail and early voting ballots in parishes with 1,000 or more absentee by mail ballots, and challenge of absentee by mail or early voting ballots. So the bill remains relative to absentee by mail and early voting ballots. The Dropbox portion of one of the statutes regarding absentee voting by mail is now dropped from the bill.
By this amendment.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Thanks for the clarification.
Thanks, Senator Price. Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. Senator Full.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And Madam Chair, I think your amendments do satisfy one of my concerns I had coming in today. It looks like there will no longer be just a blanket prohibition on drop boxes if we adopt this amendment.
That's correct.
And so if we adopt this amendment, then I guess it'd be up to the Secretary of State to make policy whether or not we use drop boxes, or is that something we put in statute normally?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything in current law that addresses whether we have them or we don't have them. So there's nothing in Louisiana law that addresses that whatsoever. We have had we do have legislation moving through, and of course we have things in statute that talk about the proper way to return your ballot and that process by mail or by fax, or there's a lot of different ways you can return your ballot. And so but ballot drop boxes, I think we're silent on in this law, in this state, and don't see the need to really address that in this bill.
Yep. Once your amendments get on, no need for me to ask any more questions about the bill. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions for Madam Chairwoman? Okay. I've got some white cards. Nancy Landry, present, would like to speak. Nancy?
Are we still on the amendment?
We sure are.
Okay.
Okay. So a motion to adopt the amendments? Okay. Senator Foyle motions we adopt the amendments. Anybody opposed? Anyone opposed? No? Okay. So we are adopting Amendment Set 1441.
Thank you.
So back on the bill.
Thank you.
Okay. We've got Nancy Landry from the Secretary of State's office present, wishes to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Chair, Madam Chair, and members. I just want to clarify one thing that about the drop boxes. The law provides specific ways that you can deliver your ballot. You can either deliver it by U.S. Postal Service, you can deliver it by courier, or you can hand deliver it, and only a close family member can hand deliver it for a voter. And so there is no room in the law for a drop box because of the specific provisions that of how you can deliver a ballot that would eliminate the possibility of a drop box being authorized by the law. So we don't think that we need a law expressly prohibiting drop boxes, although we didn't have any objection to it. We think the current law covers the situation pretty clearly. And so other than that, we really appreciate having the time to implement this, because we will have to redesign the flap, and it has to be, the whole process takes a while to redesign it, to bid it out to a printer, to test it, and all that. So, it's we're fine with it now the way it is. So that's all. Thanks.
Okay.
And the secretary's here now.
I think she did a great job.
Secretary, would you like to make any comments?
No, sir. I think she covered it well.
That's fine. Thank you. Steve Rayborn, Louisiana Register of Voters, present, provide information if requested, and Laney Duro, Secretary of State, is also present. We've got a green card, Arabelle Adams from Family Forum, present, does not wish to speak. We've got some red cards to go through. Mila June, go vote, present, would like to speak, and Melissa Flournoy, Louisiana Progressive Action, also present, wish to speak if you would like to come to the table.
Mia, you go first.
Okay.
Good point. Quick note, if these red cards are in opposition to the drop box, that's no longer relevant to this conversation. So if you would consider that in your testimony as well, please.
Got that. Thank you. I appreciate it. Good morning. My name is Mia Lejeune. I'm a student at LSU at the Manship School of Mass Communication. I currently serve as the president of Go Vote, a nonpartisan student organization dedicated to voter registration and civic engagement on LSU's campus. I am an Andrew Goodman Foundation ambassador and a member of Louisiana Vote, an organization founded at the height of the pandemic to expand access to voting. I would first like to quickly thank the members of the committee for hearing us today and for being so welcoming to students here at the Capitol this session. It is evident that you all value youth participation and perspectives, which is why I implore you to not stifle that participation in our election processes and encourage all to oppose SB 224 and the proposed amendments today. One of my responsibilities as a member of Go Vote and various civic engagement organizations is tabling across campus, registering students to vote, helping them make a voting plan, and requesting absentee ballots. To put the vast work we do into perspective, since 2018, Go Vote has registered over 6,000 students and has raised the registration rate on campus by 6.5%. I have found that many students on campus participate their right to vote through the absentee ballot process. Students come to LSU from across Louisiana, and many of them first registered to vote in their hometown DMVs. They don't want to update the registrations and prefer to be engaged in their local elections. Frequently, students come to me saying they struggle to understand the extensive requirements of the absentee ballot and fear that their votes will not be counted. Many of them are deterred from the process entirely because of the currently restricted and complicated processes. Vote by mail requirements do not coincide with students' lifestyles. We often have multiple addresses, some of us don't have driver's licenses, and all of us have full class schedules, jobs, and extracurriculars to balance. And most of the time, voting and civic engagement isn't a student's top priority. The amendments proposed today would add an additional burden on voters and students. This body should aim to make elections more inclusive and accessible to the least active communities. This bill would hinder them and make participation more difficult. And I have to ask myself, why are we making it so? Just last year, when my fellow students were advocating for easier access to voting by mail, Secretary of State Kyle Ardoin sat before you and testified that our right to vote by mail couldn't be expanded because it would threaten the sanctity of our election process. During his campaign for the office, he argued that there was no evidence of voter fraud in our current election process. He has even gone as far to say that Louisiana is the gold standard of election security, the top 5 in the nation. So again, I ask, why are we imposing these unnecessary restrictions on Louisiana voters? As lawmakers, I trust that you all won't let fear motivate and guide your decisions here today, and rather be guided by the facts. There is no evidence of significant voter fraud here in Louisiana or across the nations. Students should be able to faithfully and patriotically cast their vote without barriers. Their rights should not be negated by partisan politics prepared by a national narrative. This bill is redundant, unnecessary, and perpetuates fear and anxiety around casting a vote. I strongly urge you to vote no on Senate Bill 224. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Acting Chairman and members. I'm Melissa Flournoy. I'm the board chair of Louisiana Progress Action. And Louisiana Progress is committed to defending democracy and the right to vote. And we believe that every Louisiana citizen should be eligible to vote and encouraged to participate in elections. Louisiana Progress believes that the Secretary of State and the state and local election officials must maintain voter confidence in elections and ensure the safe and secure and fair elections in every voting precinct. Louisiana Progress also believes that the Secretary of State and the Louisiana Commission on Election Integrity and Voting should have time to review the current laws, rules, and regulations governing elections and report prior to the 2022 legislative session. Currently, Louisiana has a 92% voter registration rate, and voter registration rolls should be professionally managed and updated using legal means for democracy and the accuracy of voter rolls. An appropriate updating and review of the voting rolls should take place on an annual basis with an appropriate follow-up to track address changes, deaths, or other voter changes that affect the accuracy of the voter rolls. Efforts should be made to promote the dates of elections and statewide and correspondence generated by the Secretary of State and Registrar of Voters to ensure and encourage participation in voting. The Secretary of State should invest more in election education and information to promote voting turnout. Clear explanations and information on voter registration, absentee voting, early voting, in-person election day voting, and voting dates, times, locations, and options should be widely promoted. We agree that there should be a reasonable requirement for identity verification for voting rolls and absentee ballots that should be uniformly promoted and ensure efforts to protect against identity theft. All elected officials should focus on promoting voter confidence in elections and efforts to make elections safe, secure, and accurate. Uniform statewide standards for absentee and early voting should be promoted. We believe that the Secretary of State should ensure that the use of secure ballot boxes remains a legal option as the Secretary of State and the Louisiana Commission on Election Integrity and Voting completes their analysis. We hope that they will consider the experience of voting to make it safe, secure, and efficient, that all voters should be able to vote at a nearby location with the shortest possible wait time goal of less than 30 minutes, with confidence that their vote will be fairly counted, tabulated, and reported without fraud or interference. Individuals and nonpartisan organizations should be able to provide information to voters and at voting precincts outside the 600 vote limit. But we also believe that all voters should have access to legal functioning voting machines that will accurately tally and report votes free from opportunity of tampering or fraud with a verifiable paper trail. Every precinct should be staffed with trained election staff and volunteers to serve as poll watchers, candidates, monitors, and exit poll takers. There should be an appropriate and reasonable review of provisional ballots with standardized training for all poll workers in every precinct. Every registered voter should have a uniform voting experience in clean, well-lit, safe location with well-trained staff with enough functioning voting machines to ensure short lines and efficient voting processes. I took this opportunity to testify about all of these issues regarding voting in Louisiana because we have created the Secretary of State and the Louisiana Commission on Election Integrity and Voting. We believe that that is the appropriate place to review all of these individual pieces of voter improvement legislation. We ask that you defer Senate Bill 224 and ask that the Louisiana Commission on Election Integrity and Voting report back prior to the 22 legislative session to address many of these aspects of individual pieces of the puzzle. We're concerned that we are making the process of voting registration, absentee voting, following up and cleaning the voter rolls more complicated than necessary. We have confidence that the Secretary of State and his office are actually running safe and secure elections. Thank you.
Present and wish to speak in opposition, Charlie Stevens, Louisiana Vote, and Christian Green, League of Women Voters. Again, keep in mind we've taken the provision of the elimination of drop boxes out of consideration.
Hello, my name is Charlie Stevens, and I'm a student at LSU's Manship School of Mass Communication and the director of Louisiana Vote. I wanted to come here today to tell you a bit about Louisiana Vote. We were started in the midst of the stay-at-home order last April in an attempt to advocate for increased mail-in balloting, and we mobilized young people across the entire state to advocate for it, sending hundreds of emails to this committee, gaining thousands of petition signatures, and becoming a flagship petition for change.org, eventually being invited to a national panel regarding our work. We had meetings with the Secretary of State's office to clarify rules for becoming poll workers and encourage students to sign up to become poll workers, since poll workers are often older and thus more likely to contract the coronavirus. We had early conversations with the New Orleans Pelicans and Representative Duplessis to make the Smoothie King Center an early voting location, a location thousands of New Orleanians ended up voting at, thanks in part to our work. We are doing our part to expand access to the ballot box, and that's why we are here to speak with you today. The amendments proposed by Senator Hewitt and adopted by this committee make this bill dramatically less palatable. Senator Hewitt's amendments would add additional restrictions for submitting absentee ballots, restrictions that Secretary Ardwin called stringent shortly after Federal District Judge Shelley Digg ordered his office to expand voting options earlier in the pandemic. If the Secretary of State says that our requirements on those submitting absentee by mail ballots are stringent, why should we impose additional burdens on those attempting to cast their ballots? Senator Hewitt would add those same restrictions to the early voting affidavit process, a process that the Secretary of State says does not contain fraud in 2018 comments to the Times-Picayune when running for the office. On January 6th of last year, a national narrative was propelled that widespread fraud existed in our election infrastructure. Nothing could be farther from the truth, especially in Louisiana. The Secretary of State has testified on the House floor saying that our election security is in the top 5 in the country. Let's live in the real world. Voter fraud is rare and isolated. SB 224 is duplicative and will add additional burdens to accessing the ballot box, and I urge you to vote no on it. Thanks.
Ms. Green?
M. Christian Green, League of Women Voters, and I just want to thank and amplify some of the previous comments that have been made. We are glad that the ballot box prohibition has been dropped. The League of Women Voters does take a strong stance in favor of voter participation and access, so should there be such a prohibition introduced at a future point, we would certainly want to oppose it. But on the question of voter ID, here the League of Women Voters is a little less settled. In general, we have general concerns about things that would pose a barrier to people having access to the vote, including very tangible things such as the kind of ID one has to bring. I personally experienced voter suppression in Georgia and had no fewer than 5 forms of ID with me when I went to the polls there, so I know what that's like. But also that sort of intangible fear of doing something wrong, of messing it up. In fact, one of the activities that I've been involved in during this 2020 election season, I'm sorry Secretary Ardwin left because I wanted to congratulate him on running a historic fraud-free election. But one of the things that I did to help verify that was to do remote poll monitoring. So from July through October, November, December, into January and March, I monitored polls, drove around polls in Lafayette, St. Landry, Avoyelles, Rapides, and several river parishes in the 2nd Congressional District. And one of the things you see, and I understand it's required by law, is this large voter ID sign with very large black print, prominent, posted at every site. And it just makes me think every time, given the sort of concerns that have been articulated in the body politic about alleged fraud and problems with voter ID, this could have a sort of chilling effect on someone's wanting to come forward and vote. What if they arrive at the poll and realize they don't have the right ID? Do they even know about a provisional ballot? So anything that we do that tampers or adjusts or tweaks the voter ID laws conveys the sense that there is a problem to which it is a solution, that there is something problematic going on, and that alone can have a suppressive effect for some voters. So we want to study these new amendments, we'll watch these amendments, but I think we do oppose these new voter ID requirements that are being introduced. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. A few more cards in opposition. Again, we don't know whether this is related to the drop box or the amendments or what, but in opposition, Peter Brown, Georgia Barlow Power Coalition, Vinaya Vamason Power Coalition, Morgan Shannon Power Coalition, Chris Kaiser, ACLU, Ricky Bryant, Louisiana Vote, Kelly Garrett Vote, Jennifer Harding Vote, Terry Landry, SPLC Action Fund. Couple of emails real quick. In opposition, all related to Dropbox, Aaron Banks, Joe Pitts, Mary Walker, Mary McKell, Andrea Amar, Elena DeLaura, Vonnie Hawkins, Rosemary Goodell, Nancy Broussard, Reverend Vanderweel, and Sarah Marcello. Again, all opposed to the Dropbox provision. We did have one email in favor of the Dropbox proposal, and that was Thornton Cofield. And that's all the cards we've got. Any other questions, Madam Chairwoman? I want to make a statement real quick, and you know, looking at the bill, it amazes me that when you go into a bank to open a bank account, you provide this information. You provide more information. You provide Social Security number, address, driver's license, backup contact, etc. When you take out a loan, you provide the same information. It's amazing to me that voter suppression exists because we're asking for 2 additional pieces of information, such as the last 4 of a Social Security number or an ID number. That amazes me that argument exists. If you purchase an app on your iPhone and it requests a password, it's going to ask you basic information, but that's not suppression. So that's just some comments on me after looking at these cards. So if you don't mind closing.
Well, thank you, Senator, and thanks to everyone for your time today and hearing this bill again on behalf of Senator Cloud, and I appreciate the comments from those in the audience. You know, I think we tried to address your concerns. We did take out the ballot drop box language, and this is all intended to try to make sure that we're securing every individual's vote. Every individual has a right to vote. It is one of the pillars of our democracy. And I think this little tweak is just trying to help make sure that we are doing a better job of matching up folks who are asking for an absentee ballot with their ballot, so that we know that that is your vote and that your vote is secure and that your vote will count. And so I, support what Senator Cloud is doing. I'm happy to have had a chance to present it on her behalf, and will continue to support her in this bill going forward, should you all decide to move this bill to the floor. So I would ask that you all would consider reporting this as amended.
Thank you. What's the pleasure?
Move favorable as amended.
On behalf of Senator Womack, motion's been made to move favorable. Anyone objection?
As amended.
As amended. Thank you. Any objection? No objection. So moved. We move Senate Bill 224 forward as amended. Thank you.